Welcome to the Bread of Life Chronicles. I'm Janice, and today we're continuing our exploration of Genesis, focusing on chapter 4, where we delve into the first family's struggles, sin's entry into the human story, and the heartbreaking events that follow. Today's reflection will cover themes of jealousy, rage, the consequences of sin, and how the lives of Cain and his descendants unfolds against this backdrop. In our last video, we looked at Genesis 3 and the story of temptation in the Garden of Eden. We saw how Adam and Eve's choice to eat the forbidden fruit led to immediate and lasting consequences, not just for themselves, but for all of humanity. They lost innocence, experienced shame, and ultimately had to leave the presence of God in Eden. Today, as we look at Genesis 4, we'll see how Adam and Eve's sin impacted the lives of their children. The chapter tells us that their sons offered sacrifices to God, which shows that they now lived outside the perfect relationship with God that their parents once knew. The entry of sin has changed human life profoundly. People now needed to bring offerings, strive, and wrestle with temptations that pull them away from God. In this chapter, we'll see Cain's failure to resist sin, resulting in jealousy, anger, hate, murder, and the tragic separation of a family. Through Cain's story, we're invited to reflect on the deeper consequences of living outside of God's original design. As we reflect on these verses, I encourage you to open your heart and mind to what the story of Cain holds for you in your life today. Genesis 4 tells the story of Cain and Abel, two brothers with different jobs and offerings. Cain, a farmer, brings an offering of the fruits of the earth, while Abel, a shepherd, brings the firstborn of his flock. And God looks favorably on Abel's offering, but not on Cain's. The story of Cain and Abel underscores the far-reaching impact of Adam and Eve's original disobedience. Humanity now lives with the presence of sin, and even the simple act of spending time with God had become complex and challenging. Offerings were now needed, and people must actively resist the desire to sin, which God warns lies at the door. God says in verses 6 and 7 to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." At this point, God is still with humanity, instructing them how to live in the new reality, learning to resist evil desires. Cain, however, fails to take heed and rule over this temptation. He allows jealousy, hate, and rage to take control rather than dominate it, as God instructed in his warning. Filled with jealousy, rage, and hate, Cain speaks with his brother. One original text says he invites Abel to go to the fields, and then he kills him. This marks the first murder in human history, a tragic act that emphasizes the destructive power of unchecked sin and a consequence of the fall of Eden. So God confronts Cain about his brother, to which Cain responds with a lie and disrespect. Verse 9 says this, "Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Where is Abel your brother?' He said, 'I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?'" His response is mind-blowing for me. It reveals not only a lack of responsibility, but also a lack of reverence for God. As in the case with his parents, God confronts him with the consequences of his sin. Verse 11 says, "Now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." Verse 12, "When you till the ground, it will no longer yield its fruit for you. A fugitive and a vagabond you will be on the earth." This declaration effectively ends Cain's life as a farmer. He is now sentenced to be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, experiencing a similar separation from family and purpose that his parents did when they were sent out of Eden. Cain, fearing for his life, pleads for mercy, and God grants him a mark of protection, sparing him from being killed by anyone. Now let me bring your attention to some key points from the chapter. Cain's dismissive question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" poses a larger question about our responsibility to others. His attitude reflects the isolation and disconnect we can experience when we place our own desires and feelings over compassion and love for others. Cain's actions lead to severe consequences. His murder of Abel not only brings about his own alienation, but also deepens the distance between humanity and God. He becomes a fugitive, separated not only from his family, but also from his life's work as a farmer, as the earth will no longer yield to him its fruit. This speaks to humanity's greater alienation from God, as well as all of creation due to sin. Another point I would like to highlight is that despite Cain's terrible actions, God shows mercy. God gives him a mark of protection even as he faces punishment. This act demonstrates a balance of justice and mercy. God doesn't ignore Cain's sin, but he also doesn't allow revenge. Instead, he sets limits on the consequences, a powerful testament of God's grace and mercy in a broken world. Living outside of God's presence leads to more evil and an ungodly family heritage. Verse 16 tells us, "Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord, and he has a son. He was a fugitive and a wanderer, but he wanted to have permanence and protection for his son." So he builds his son a city, the first city. Verse 17 says, "And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore a son called Enoch. And he built a city and named the city after the name of his son, whose descendants started the first tent-making industry, the entertainment industry, and the metalwork industries." And his great-grandson Lamech continues his great-great-grandfather's legacy of violence. Lamech commits murder and invokes on himself the protection Cain received from God. Lamech is also the first recorded polygamist. We see in verse 23 where he says, "Wives of Lamech, listen to my speech. I've killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77fold." The distance between God and man had so widened that we don't see God in Lamech's story at all. This is yet another example of how sin, when unchecked, can spread across generations and deeply shape the human story. However, in the midst of tragedy and loss, there is a glimmer of hope. And after Abel's death and Cain's exile, God gives Adam and Eve another son, Seth. Through the line of Seth, humanity begins to call on the name of the Lord, reestablishing some connection to the Creator. Seth's birth symbolizes God's ongoing commitment to redemption and humanity's return to God, even as sin continues to affect the human relationships and society. So much has happened in this chapter, but let's slow down and change gears a bit. As we think about what this story might mean for us today, I invite you to take a moment for a guided meditation. Find a comfortable spot, close your eyes, take a deep breath, inhale, exhale, and become still. The scripture says, "Be still and know that I am God." Breathe in, breathe out, and be still. Now imagine a small, quiet field, the place where Cain and Abel brought their offerings to God. You can see the altar, the crops, and the sheep. The still, small voice says, "Why are you upset? Why are you sad?" Imagine the tension in the air as Cain wrestles with his anger and jealousy. Picture yourself observing this moment. As you observe and listen to God's still small voice entreating Cain, what thoughts and emotions arise for you as you witness this inner struggle? I'll pause here just as you contemplate what the thoughts that arise for you are. Now imagine what it might feel like to stand in a moment of decision in your own life and consider what voices or impulses are you drawn to listen to, and which ones do you need to resist. As you continue to breathe in, breathe out, I invite you to reflect on a time when you experienced jealousy or anger. How do those feelings influence your actions? What might it look like to master those emotions as God urged Cain to do? How could responding differently have changed the outcome? I'll pause a moment here for you to reflect on that. Now let's make it sticky. I encourage you to journal about a time when anger or jealousy influenced your choices. What did you learn from that experience? And how might it help you to make different choices in the future? As I wrap up our reflection today on Genesis 4, we're reminded of the deep impact our choices have on ourselves and on others. Cain's story warns us of the dangers of allowing unchecked emotions and sin to shape our actions and our relationships. However, even in judgment, there's a thread of mercy. God is just, but He's also merciful. He gives protection and eventually gives Adam and Eve another son, Seth, who carries forward hope and a renewed relationship with God. If this reflection spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Also, I've included a free tool in the description below that is designed to help you grow in grace and intimacy with God. Please feel free to click on the link to download the free tool and use it each day as you seek to grow closer to God. Okay, remember to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me what you think about Cain and Abel's story. Have you happened to see parallels in your own life or in the world around you? I look forward to continuing our journey through Genesis. So until next time,